evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we're in our 33rd year, I talk to writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished, what they might be planning for the future. It's a wider net than just writers, however. We have had on other brands of artists, sculptors, actors, musicians. So if you have an idea for a writer or other artist who might be a good fit for the Writer's Block, watch for our address at the end of the show. We'd love to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that cable is the source of all the original programming that comes out of Gloucester, 1623 Studios. You don't get that with Dish. So stick with cable, stick with the Writer's Block. I'm very happy to say tonight we do have a writer, although you may not know him as primarily a writer, but he is an excellent writer. His name is Bruce Tobey, and he's a former counselor, a former mayor, and now very active in planning and informing people about Gloucester's 400th anniversary celebration. Bruce Tobey, welcome to the Writer's Block.
This is a real pleasure. Thank you.
I appreciate you being on. I know you're busy commuting between here and the South, and it's good to have you on.
Thank you.
I said before the show I wanted to get just a little bit of background. If people aren't familiar with you, where did you grow up and where did you go to school?
Well, I grew up in East Gloucester, and interestingly enough, all these years later, we've moved back over there. So life is a circular path, I guess.
Were you born here at Addison Gilbert?
You know, I realized that all those years running for office, I lied because I said I'm a native-born son of Gloucester. And then someone reminded me that I was actually born in Beverly Hospital.
Oh,
so you take your risks. But other than that, native-born, graduated from Gloucester High in 1971. Did the Gloucester schools all the way. They served me well. From there, I went off to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, where I majored in a sector that doesn't have a whole lot of application to my life anymore, given the times, which is to say Russian language and Soviet studies.
So are you fluent in Russian still?
Yeah, fluent in Russian. I would be fluent in Russian again if you parachuted me into Moscow for 3 days. It'll come back that quickly.
So you visited Russia?
I have. I studied there in the summer of 1994. Half of it was in Moscow, half of it was in then Leningrad. It was really an amazing experience, eye-opening.
So the Ukraine-Russian conflict must have special interest.
Well, you know, one of my regrets is that I had an opportunity to do a side trip to Kyiv, and I didn't take it up because I had to get back home. And yet, I've read Ukrainian history. I've spoken on occasion, believe it or not, with a group of Ukrainian mayors and had to apologize that I was going to have to speak to them in Russian because they didn't teach Ukrainian when I went to university.
Well, that's an interesting background about you. I did not know that.
Yeah. It was, you know, the funny thing was it was a comparative study in government models. You know, you're on this path of U.S. government and what have you, if you do a political science concentration. But obviously there was a strongly competing other model. And it's motivated me in some of the things I've done. I mean, you may remember late in my time as mayor, I made 2 trips heading a USAID delegation to Montenegro, one of the breakaway republics from Yugoslavia. And they were transitioning from hardline socialism to a more Western-oriented model.
What?
And it was living study, you know. I made a point of going to Cuba twice before the Castros were gone because I wanted to see. It was almost cast in amber.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good segue from your background as a Gloucester native. Mm-hmm. I won't reveal again anyway to anybody that you were born in Beverly. But you're a Gloucester native, born and bred in Gloucester, and you know because of your background in Gloucester and your background in the cultural life and the political life of Gloucester, you know the city as well as anybody in it. Can you summarize for us your political life or committed life, whether it's political or not, going up through the council and your years as mayor.
The funny thing, John, is in 1969, when I was the ripe old age of 16, I took Bill Saltonstall, the former state senator, passed away now, who ran for Congress against Michael Harrington in a special election. I went door to door with him, with then state rep, former mayor Dick Silver, with Bill Saltonstall and Dick, down at Lincoln Park, looking for votes. He was a fine man. So I've been at this for a long time.
So he ran against Michael
Harrington,
who's still alive, I believe.
yes, yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, years later, I practiced law at Michael's firm.
So it all goes around. Yeah.
All around.
So you started in '69 campaigning.
Yep.
Going door to door.
Yep.
Grassroots kind of work.
Way back in the day. Bottom line is that after graduating from Wesleyan and doing law school at Suffolk, I was accepted into a program of the United States Coast Guards as a 03 lieutenant. It was the equivalent of a JAG, Judge Advocate General, a service attorney, and spent 4 years living in New York City practicing there. But came back in 1982, having done my 4-year term and having been offered the city solicitor's job by then Mayor, the late Leah Walper. And God, the stories and the experiences. There were a lot of difficult issues. That was my introduction to the world of sewers.
So he was he ran a cleaning
dry cleaning
place up by
Tuxedo.
Yes.
Rental. Yeah.
Yes.
Union Hill Laundry.
I remember. I knew his son.
Yeah. Bobby.
So when did you first decide to run for office?
It was always in my blood. My dad had been a city councilor for 3 terms in the 1950s under the old Plan E model. Some of my earliest memories, I remember one of his yard signs. I think I was 4. It was white on green. And even when he was unable to continue to serve because he was disabled, he was always conscious of politics. There was always talk of politics in the House. And so it was in the blood. I was a candidate, back in high school. I was the senior class president when we graduated all those years ago. So you get to a track, I guess. So I ran, my first race was probably one of the most ridiculously audacious things I've ever done. Having been back about 1.5 years running for state rep when that seat opened up, when Dick Silver became mayor. And Pat Fio and I had one of the most spirited races, and I think the world of Pat these years later, that Gloucester's ever seen, with more votes cast in a Democratic primary than you'll see in 4 or 5 primaries anywhere else rolled together. It was spirited. It was really a fascinating experience. But happily for me, I did not get elected. Pat did. And that focused us on things like starting that family and having a career.
Who won that?
Pat won. Pat Fio won. And I'm grateful.
So your first office was class president.
That's right.
And then you ran unsuccessfully for state rep.
Yep.
And then your next race was for the council?
It was for council. I think it was 1987. Bought the ticket. Bet $1 will buy a half a cup of coffee. Ran for a second term, was reelected. At that point, Bill Squillis was mayor, had been.
And he left.
And the council had to elect his successor, just as we did 7 years ago as a community, with Carolyn Kirk moving on to state service,
yes.
and the council choosing the Fathi Romeo Taken. It was 1991. The seat was open for a year, and in plain English, everything was going to hell because of the recession. We didn't have any of the bounce of remember the Massachusetts miracle of the Dukakis era. We hadn't seen a lot of the economic growth, particularly in technology, that had been a high mark of that. Plus the fisheries were getting beaten up. It was a difficult time. So I made a very, for me, easy decision, which was I'm going to offer myself. I'm going to serve a year. I'm not going to run for re-election that year. There's too much to be done. And frankly, there was the pragmatic decision that if I did the job right, no one would want me back. I really thought that by doing the unpleasant, necessary things,
Yeah.
it would be a self-fulfilling prophecy anyway. And after 38 ballots and having withdrawn as a candidate, I was elected. It was a fascinating exercise in lots of different ways, not the least of which was sometimes to close a deal, you have to walk away. It was an amazing year. We got a lot done. I kept the promise.
I was going to say, and you kept your promise.
Leave it at
Not
that.
everybody does.
No, it's a hard promise to keep in a way
Yeah.
because there's a life pattern that you fall into quickly. But that was sort of beside the point. You know, we had young kids, and it mattered to me that, you know, what I'd said I was going to do, I did. But I didn't say I'd never run again. And 2 years later, I came back, and Bill Rafter had been there for 2 years. We didn't see eye to eye, particularly on things like, and Bill did a good job. I'll come back to that. But on North Gloucester sewers, if you remember that battle royale that had gone on for decades, you know, we just had diametrically opposing points of view. I won that race. In the meantime, the city's economics.
That was 94.
I came back January 1, 94. We were junk bond. We were junk bond, which is to say our credit rating was zero. And yet we had to build these sewers, rebuild the high school, deal with the landfill, and by the way, run the ship in the meantime, and a whole lot more.
So
And the funny thing was, we got the bond rating back in 2 months by dint of having a plan that we shared with Wall Street. And one of the guys who helped contribute to that plan by his 2 years of solid performance on the finance side was Bill Rafter. I thanked Bill for that at the time because it mattered.
So you never know who's going to be your going to be your friend the next time you turn the corner.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I do remember that time. I remember we missed out on a big federal grant because Leo didn't want it.
Oh yeah. I won't characterize his decision that way. But.
I'm not in politics, so I don't have to be as tactful as.
Yeah. Although I'm not in politics either.
So you were out for a couple of years when Bill was in.
Actually, on school.
On
school committee. I served on school committee those 2
Sure,
years.
yeah. Besides making a living, just by the way.
But not for nothing.
So then you came back and you stayed as mayor until John Bell.
4 terms.
Four terms.
I left
until
January
99 or
02.
02 when John Bell came in for 3 terms, and then we're getting right up to
Here we are.
life.
Well, and by the way, not for nothing, the world of transitions is a transition that speaks to the 400th. In 1998, we were 375 years old. Who celebrates a 375th? But it seemed to me that we had come a long way by then from where we'd been in 91. There were weeks I'd sit with the city auditor. We didn't know how we were going to make payroll. Now we were back in the solid A's in terms of our bond rating, and we were running surpluses every single year. And we were banking it. I felt like someone who'd grown up in the Depression, hiding money under rocks, in the basement, in a closet, in the sheets, whatever. And we had built ourselves back up and we're doing things. We had that new high school. We had North Gloucester well on the way to be done. We'd capped the landfill that had been an open sore in the community for decades. And on it went, investing in education. Good stuff. But I always would say on the campaign trail that Gloucester had this issue of perception, self-perception, like Groucho Marx. I wouldn't want to belong to a club that would have me as a member.
Say, what's that again?
I wouldn't want to, Groucho said this often, I would not want to belong to a club that had me as a member.
Yes,
and that's not the way to feel about Gloucester. I said, let's have a celebration. John, who'd been on council and council president, John Bell, came back. He worked with Gap Lafada, who was heart and soul all about Gloucester and his public service. They co-chaired an effort. We set up a nonprofit corporation to run finance through and to keep it separate from city politics. It had to be beyond that. And they put on a hell of a program. But it was also very deliberately a dry run for the 400th. And in the world of no good deed going unpunished,
Yes.
here I am.
I want to say your pride in Gloucester and the efforts you've put into Gloucester over decades, many decades, not that you're that old, but their decades are beginning to pile up. Your commitment and your pride in the city really comes through strongly. You glow with it, and it's nice to see, because I do run into people, as you do, who say, Gloucester, I don't want to belong to that club. It's kind of, Gloucester, Manchester by the sea and Gloucester by the smell, those kind of old traditional slurs aggravate the daylights out of me. I've only been here 50 years, but I love this city like I've never loved any other place. And I commend your work all that time, and commend you for getting ready 25 years early for our big anniversary next year, 1623, 2023,
Yeah.
400 years.
Yeah. Yep.
And you are a co-chair with
Bob Gillis and Ruth Pino.
three of you are the triumvirate, who are overseeing the celebration and have already begun to oversee the celebration. And I want to ask you about that in general. I want to begin by mentioning to our audience again that you are a writer. You've written a lot of legislation, and you've written a lot for work and in Gloucester as an officer and in your own personal life. But also, you did a wonderful piece in the 400 Stories project, which is part of Gloucester's 400 celebration, on Joe Orange.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful piece. Can you tell us first about that story in your writing experience, because this is the writer's block,
Indeed.
and also what it was for, the context, the 400 Stories project?
Originally, the concept was that we had so many people in this community that you wanted to put a spigot inside of the head of to get all the stories. I mean, Freddie Kairos, who was city clerk forever, the late Freddie Kairos, the stories he had, and we never got them on tape. And Freddie wouldn't have been a guy to sit down and write a memoir, was his way. So the original concept, John, was that we were going to do an oral history project. And we're actually under contract to have technical assistance from Endicott College. It was a nice arrangement. We did some training, and it stuck, it helped. Of course, the wrench in the works was the pandemic. As we launched, the pandemic landed, which made that kind of face-to-face personal contact that oral history implied harder. So we shifted, and in fact kept the 400th alive and busy as an ongoing enterprise, in large measure with the 400 Stories project. First with Laura Ventimiglia as its head, and then our executive director. And now
She had to lighten up on her duties.
That's right. So now Elsa Zemke has come on board as our executive director, and Terry Weber is our head of the 400 Stories project.
Former guest on the writer's block.
Indeed.
A wonderful
Indeed.
editor.
Wonderful writer. Best editor in the world.
And writer. Yeah.
It was I'm tough to manage when I write. I've done a lot of writing for professionally and otherwise, and I don't like being edited. Who likes being edited? She was a pleasure. And we are well on the road to 400 Stories. I mean, your work, the piece you did on John Gus Foote, was wonderful. It was wonderful. And people are doing that.
Thank you.
Dean Sala of Joe George's Restaurant, a Gloucester landmark kind of place.
I have to say, there's a couple stories on there about people I had never heard of, by relatives I had never heard of, and I find myself tearing up halfway through it because there's such sincere, genuine emotion and love, and we need to see more of that in this cynical,
That's why I did the Joe Orange
age.
piece. That's why I did the Joe Orange piece. Joe was an icon in my life. His dedication to this place, but his awareness of the world beyond, bringing it all home again, act globally by acting locally.
Your piece is excellent, and there's a wonderful picture of Joe there as well as other pictures. And I have to recommend that to any viewer who hasn't been to the Gloucester400 site, 400 Stories site, to visit it and see your piece on Joe Orange.
A big part of, I don't know about you, but the hardest part of this project for me was to stop with the research and get on with the writing. I went down the rabbit hole of research, and my oldest daughter, Emily, was my sidekick helping me with this project, immeasurably helpful. And finally, she'd had it. She reached down the rabbit hole, grabbed me by the hand, pulled me out, and said, "Start writing." It was a huge service.
You get into these topics, you could write you discover fairly quickly you could write a book, you could write a biography.
I may not be done with this one. That's right.
That's
there was research
not what they want.
I could have kept on forever. That would have taken me around the country that touched on Joe, that I'm not going to speak to because it's only a theory, but it's a strongly held theory. And I don't want to let go of it, and I'll leave you with that as a teaser. But the thing with Joe was he passed away during the pandemic. And the people who loved Joe, and they were everywhere, they were in sports, they were in day-to-day life in the community, they cared about that watershed and our natural surroundings being kept pristine, had no way to say goodbye, had no way to come together and share in it.
Yeah.
And we accomplished that through the dozens of interviews. There was one interview, it took a whole morning. We sat in the Savings Bank director's room around the table. Emily was taping. And it was a bunch of hard-nosed guys. A bunch of them had been athletes. A bunch of them trained in the weight room with Joe. Some of them would be up there in the watershed on skis, hoping he didn't catch him because Joe wasn't big on cross-country skiing in the watershed. But every one of those guys, every one of us different, loved him, loved the guy, and so admired what he had done in his life in the military. You knew Joe. I mean, who else could just extemporaneously recite from the Greek classics?
You captured that very well. And in the photograph of him, the side looking, he looks. You can see his military background and his strength and that, and your piece. And it's one of the most well researched. I say your credits extend for a page and a half at the end of with his commendation, and to your daughter too, and help. But it's a really wonderful piece, and I want to keep stressing that because maybe some of our audience has not heard of the 100 or the 400 story project, and we want to make sure they are well informed.
And if I could make an invitation on your time here at the Writer's Block, it would be to folk who have that someone who's mattered in their life, who was Gloucester. Write that story. Write that story. Reach out to Terry. Give me a call. Drop me a line or an email, tobybruce@gmail.com, and we'll get you into the mill right away. Because this is a project. In the 1923 300th anniversary, there was a legacy gift. And it was the Man at the Wheel statue, a very significant token of a major event that's critical to the community now. The 400 Stories Project, which is going to be available in multiple formats, is meant to be a lasting tribute to Gloucester.
And it's coming out in hard copy as well.
Hard copy, online, it is there to stay. It's meant to be.
I want to repeat that anybody who wants to write a story or learn about the 400th anniversary in general can go to the website that we are going to super on the show during your interview. And I also want to repeat your personal email, tobybruce@gmail.com.
That's right.
If anybody wants to get in personal contact. I hope you won't be flooded with thousands of emails, but maybe a couple.
Maybe at least a few. Yeah, we're going to get to that 400
Maybe
mark.
a couple. Good,
Yeah.
good. So what else is is in the works for the Gloucester 400th celebration?
We have been very busily preparing a very full year of activity. And we've made a point, by the way, if you see our logo It's Gloucester400 plus. It was made really clear when we were doing community outreach 4 or 5 years ago. We did every 6 months a session in City Hall on a Saturday morning. And boy, did we get great feedback and wonderful ideas. The plus is given to us by a group headed up by Miranda Aisling, who's on staff at the Cape Air Museum. And it speaks to the fact that everything was not wondrous and joyful in the evolution of a community over 400 years. A lot of our early wealth was built on the backs of enslaved people. The land that we occupied was the territory of the Pawtucket Indians who were displaced. And when you look at the cenotaph or the memorial mural in the tower of City Hall and the staircase, some of those folks we lost at sea were indentured servants. It was not all equity and inclusion and equal access.
I want to commend that force in your leadership for the 400th anniversary, that force towards diversity and recognition.
Exactly.
I was told by Joanne Hart, I believe it was, that women had one role 100 years ago at the 300th. It was to arrange the flowers.
Exactly.
Let alone roles for any other so-called minorities, or recognition of the indigenous people. People are shocked to know that slavery existed in Gloucester, as it did throughout the country in different degrees. But Gloucester Timeline, that wonderful book, it mentions a lot of pretty scary and uncomfortable details. And your leadership and the 400th anniversary celebration is recognizing much of that varied background.
It's important. This is not, God bless Maggie Rosa. She was the one who first pointed it out to me. Mayor, you cannot be saying celebration. How about and commemoration? Because there was a lot to reflect on. I got it, as did Bob and Ruth and Laura and Elsie now. It's just a vitally important consideration that can't get lost.
Yes, absolutely necessary. I'm glad to see it's
so that's going to spill out.
Forcefully pressed. I just noticed the clock. I would like to keep going. But then the shows that are on after us get mad.
Yes.
So, Bruce Tobey, I want to thank you so much for being on the Writer's Block and filling us in about your interesting personal background in Gloucester and also your service to Gloucester, both as a counselor, as a mayor for several terms, and now as one of the trio of people chairing the direction of Gloucester's 400th anniversary celebrations. I use anniversary and celebration together.
That's right. Observation. Thank you, John. Been great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, too, in television audience. I hope you have enjoyed our half hour with Bruce Tobey and learning something about his background, his love and charity and affection for Gloucester, and also for the celebration, which is just on our doorstep now. Thanks again, and I hope to see you next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.